The golden anniversary of Charles and Eleanor Peterson was the talk of their quiet town, a celebration of 50 years of devotion. Friends and family gathered in the Petersons' stately home, admiring the framed photos of the couple's life together. As Charles, a retired lawyer, made his toast, the guests listened intently, basking in the glow of what appeared to be a perfect marriage. But Eleanor had a different plan that evening. For months, she had lived with a revelation that shattered her image of the man she thought she knew. She had stumbled upon a hidden bank account, then a second phone, and finally, a stack of letters tucked into the attic. The contents were damning: secret meetings, financial transactions, and love notes addressed to a woman named Andrea. Eleanor spent sleepless nights in turmoil, questioning every memory, every touch, and every word of their shared life. Now, as the anniversary celebration drew to a close, Eleanor found herself staring into the faces of friends and neighbors, all unaware of the darkness that had invaded her marriage. With a wine glass in hand, she tapped it lightly with a spoon. The chime silenced the chatter, and all eyes turned toward her. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice deceptively steady. "Tonight, we celebrate 50 years, a lifetime, really, of commitment, trust, and love." Her gaze shifted to Charles, who smiled back, oblivious to what was about to unfold. "But tonight, I have a confession to make. Or rather, Charles does." The room fell into a stunned silence. Charles's smile faded, replaced by a look of confusion. He tried to interject, but Eleanor raised a hand, halting him. She pulled out a small bundle of papers from her purse and began reading aloud, her voice unwavering as she revealed the details of his double life: the secret account, the weekly rendezvous, the payments that suggested something much darker than infidelity. Charles paled, his mind scrambling for an explanation, but there was no way out. The truth was laid bare in front of everyone they knew. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, disbelief giving way to judgment. Eleanor dropped the papers on the table and walked out, leaving Charles alone in a room full of eyes that no longer saw him as the devoted husband he pretended to be. In the days that followed, the story spread through the town like wildfire. Gossip turned to speculation, and soon the police became involved. The money Charles had been transferring wasn't just for another woman. It was linked to fraudulent activities dating back decades, buried beneath layers of deception. Investigators uncovered connections to a web of financial schemes that had bled clients dry, and Charles was swiftly arrested. Eleanor's public revelation shattered not just her marriage, but the entire image of the man everyone thought they knew. As Charles sat in a jail cell awaiting trial, he realized that his downfall had come at the hands of the person he had underestimated the most: his wife. For Eleanor, there was a bitter satisfaction in knowing she had exposed the truth. But the emptiness left by 50 years of lies was a wound that would never fully heal. The town, once charmed by the Petersons' storybook romance, now whispered of betrayal and crime. And as the leaves turned and the anniversary party faded into memory, Eleanor moved away from the place that had once been her whole world, determined to start anew, even if it meant doing so alone. Eleanor woke up to the first quiet morning in weeks, the echoes of her dramatic revelation still reverberating through the town. She had left Charles's house, the house they had shared for most of their lives, taking only a suitcase and the letters she had read at the party. Staying there would have been unbearable, the memories too raw and the silence too loud. She moved into a small rental on the edge of town, away from prying eyes. Charles, meanwhile, was in a very different situation. The police investigations had revealed a tangled web of financial crimes, from embezzlement to tax evasion. At first, he denied everything, claiming that his work as a lawyer required certain unorthodox methods, and that Eleanor had simply misunderstood. But as investigators dug deeper, the evidence piled up. Every transaction was traced back to Charles, each one a brick in the prison that now awaited him. The town's sympathy initially lay with Eleanor, but as more details of Charles's life came to light, opinions started to shift. Whispers spread in cafes and at the market. How could she not have known? Did she turn a blind eye to his activities? Some even suggested that she might have been complicit in his schemes until it suited her to throw him under the bus. Eleanor heard these rumors, and though they stung, she knew the truth. Her only crime was loving a man who had lived a lie. Eleanor tried to focus on rebuilding her life, but the constant calls from the police, the lawyers, and even reporters kept dragging her back to the nightmare. She became a reluctant character in the drama of her husband's downfall. Each new headline, another reminder of the years she had spent in ignorance. She couldn't help but feel a strange, bitter gratitude that she had exposed him herself. At least, it hadn't come from a scandalous news story first. One rainy afternoon, she received an unexpected visitor. It was Detective Karen Holloway, the lead investigator on Charles's case. Tall and sharp-eyed, Detective Holloway exuded a no-nonsense air that made Eleanor feel small and exposed, even in her own living room. "Mrs. Peterson, thank you for agreeing to see me," Detective Holloway began, her tone professional, yet probing. "I have a few more questions about your husband's activities. There are some things that don't quite add up." Eleanor nodded, bracing herself. "I've told you everything I know, Detective. I only found out about the accounts a few months ago." Holloway's gaze lingered on Eleanor, as if measuring the truth of her words. "Yes, but there's more. We've found indications of a second identity. It appears that Charles may have been living under an alias in another state. The bank accounts, the transfers, they don't fully explain how he managed to hide so much for so long. It's as if he had a second life, one we've yet to uncover." The words hit Eleanor like a punch to the gut. A second life? She had thought she'd unraveled all the secrets when she confronted him at the anniversary party. But this was something else, something deeper, darker. Her mind spun with the possibilities. Did he have another family? More hidden money? The thought of more buried secrets made her feel physically ill. "Are you saying he might have had another family?" she whispered, the idea barely forming into words. Detective Holloway leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "That's what we're trying to determine. We're tracing the movements associated with this alias, but so far, it's a ghost. I was hoping you might have seen or heard something that could help." Eleanor shook her head slowly, her thoughts racing. She felt like a fool, again. What kind of man had she married, and how had he managed to deceive her so thoroughly? I don't know. I thought I knew everything after I found the letters, but this..." The detective left shortly after, but her words lingered like a shadow in the room. As Eleanor stood by the window, watching the rain fall in heavy sheets, she realized that the nightmare was far from over. Charles's arrest had been just the beginning. If what Detective Holloway suggested was true, then there were still pieces of his life she had yet to unearth. The next few weeks passed in a blur. Charles's trial loomed on the horizon, and every day seemed to bring a new revelation. Eleanor found herself dragged into the courtroom, facing her husband for the first time since the anniversary. He looked older, haggard, the sharp lines of his face softened by sleepless nights and worry. In the courtroom, Charles's lawyer spun a defense of desperation and mistakes. He claimed that Charles's actions were driven by a midlife crisis, that he had felt trapped by the expectations of his role as a husband and provider. He suggested that Charles had simply made poor decisions, and that Eleanor's public accusation had been a vindictive attempt to humiliate him. But as the prosecution presented the evidence, the story of Charles's double life became clearer. They revealed the second identity, Thomas Granger. Under this name, he had purchased a small cabin in Vermont, registered in a false name, and had even taken out a life insurance policy. It wasn't just fraud. It was a meticulously constructed second existence. The most damning evidence came in the form of surveillance photos showing Charles Thomas with a woman in Vermont, their interactions too familiar to be mere acquaintances. Eleanor recognized the woman's face immediately. Andrea, the name from the letters. Her stomach twisted with the realization that her husband had truly built another life, a parallel world that ran alongside their own for years. As the photos were shown to the courtroom, Charles finally broke down, his carefully controlled mask slipping. Tears streamed down his face, and he muttered a broken apology. But it wasn't enough. Not for the court. Not for Eleanor. The judge's gavel fell like a final judgment on the life they had built together, sentencing Charles to 15 years in prison for fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft. Eleanor left the courthouse that day feeling like a ghost, wandering through the ruins of her past. She had destroyed her husband's deception, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she had lost something too. Some part of herself that had believed in the man she thought she knew. As she drove away from the town she had called home for 50 years, Eleanor wondered if she would ever find a place where she could be free of Charles's shadow. But one thing was certain. The secrets she had uncovered had not only destroyed her marriage, they had rewritten the entire story of her life. Months passed after Charles's sentencing, but the weight of his betrayal still clung to Eleanor like a shroud. She remained in the small rental house, trying to forge a new life amidst the ashes of the old one. Her days were filled with quiet routines, morning walks, reading in the afternoons, and late nights spent listening to the rain patter against the windows. But her mind kept drifting back to the questions that still lingered, the mysteries that Detective Holloway had hinted at. One gray November afternoon, Eleanor received a letter from Charles. She hesitated before opening it, her hands trembling with a mix of anger and curiosity. It was the first time he had reached out since his arrest, and she braced herself for whatever excuses or apologies he might offer. But the letter held no apologies. Instead, it was a confession, one that unraveled a final secret that neither she nor the detectives had uncovered. Charles admitted to everything, the fraudulent accounts, the false identity, and his affair with Andrea. He wrote of how he had met Andrea during a business trip years ago and had fallen into a reckless relationship, desperate for a thrill that his life with Eleanor no longer provided. Yet, as she read further, Eleanor realized that this was not just about infidelity. Charles revealed that the secret accounts he had been maintaining weren't just for Andrea. They were hush money. Andrea had learned of his financial schemes and had threatened to expose him unless he kept paying her. Charles described how their once passionate affair had turned into a nightmare of blackmail, driving him deeper into his own lies. The cabin in Vermont, the life insurance policy, everything was part of a plan to disappear if Andrea ever made good on her threats. He admitted that he had even considered fleeing entirely, starting a new life somewhere far away. But Eleanor's discovery had forced his hand and brought everything crashing down. In his final lines, Charles wrote, "I know I deserve everything that has happened, and I can't change the pain I've caused you. But there is one thing you deserve to know. Andrea is still out there. She has my secrets, but she has secrets of her own. She won't let this rest." Eleanor dropped the letter, her mind reeling. It was as if she had pulled back one final curtain, revealing a new layer to the man she thought she knew. But now, there was a new danger, one that Charles had left for her to face alone. She took the letter to Detective Holloway, who listened with a furrowed brow, absorbing the new information. "We've been looking for Andrea, but so far, she's been hard to pin down," Holloway said. "If Charles is telling the truth, she could be a risk, not just to him, but to you as well. She might see you as a loose end." Eleanor's heart pounded at the thought. She had believed that exposing Charles's double life would be the end of her ordeal, but now she realized it was only the beginning. Holloway promised to increase patrols around Eleanor's neighborhood and to continue the search for Andrea, but the detective's cautionary tone lingered in the air like an unspoken threat. That night, Eleanor found herself unable to sleep. She paced the small house, checking the locks on the doors and windows, her mind filled with visions of shadows lurking outside. She knew that Andrea, whoever she was, represented a dangerous unknown, one that could strike without warning. The next morning, Eleanor decided that she wouldn't live in fear. She drove to the bank and withdrew the last of her savings, then headed to her lawyer's office to finalize the sale of the rental. By evening, she had packed her few belongings and loaded them into her car. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Eleanor took one last look at the town that had been her home for so many years. It was time to leave behind the life that Charles had tainted with his lies. She drove through the night, the open road stretching out like a promise of freedom. She didn't have a destination in mind, only a desire to escape the ghosts of her past. And as the miles rolled by, she felt a strange sense of relief wash over her. For the first time in months, she felt as though she was in control of her own fate. 2 states away, in a small motel, Eleanor received one last call from Detective Holloway. "We found Andrea," Holloway said. "She's been picked up on charges related to the blackmail and fraud. I thought you'd want to know that she won't be a threat anymore." Eleanor closed her eyes, absorbing the news. The danger was gone, but so was any connection she had left to her old life. With Andrea in custody and Charles behind bars, the story of the Petersons had finally reached its end. But as she looked out at the unfamiliar horizon, Eleanor realized that she had something she hadn't felt in years. A future, one that wasn't defined by a husband's lies or a stranger's threats. It wouldn't be easy, and the past would always haunt her, but she would build something new, something that was truly hers. She hung up the phone, took a deep breath, and stepped outside into the crisp morning air. The sun was rising, casting the world in shades of gold. Eleanor stood there, letting the light wash over her, ready to face whatever came next.